Good morning, good day. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Melinda Herring, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center here in Washington, D.C. We have a great panel with 5 terrific experts to tell you about how Ukraine can survive Russia's war. And we're looking at the media sector. We have broadcast journalists, we have online journalists, we have English language journalists, and we have the Minister of Culture. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce everyone. We have Marichka Padalko, who's an anchor with 1+1, and she is on the media marathon, and she's going to tell us all about it. We have Alexander Thatchenko, who's the Minister of Culture. Welcome. And this is his first time at the Atlantic Council. We're really happy to have you here, sir. We have Sevgil Musaeva, who's the editor of Ukrainska Pravda. It's one of the most popular online publications. We have Olga Rudenko, who is the editor of the Kiev Independent, and they started the Kiev Independent weeks before the war started. So looking forward to an update on how they're doing. And finally, we have our very own Michael Bosserque, who is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he is on CNN and all over the media doing an amazing job. So I hope you've had a chance to catch him. We're going to use our regular format. We're going to have a conversation for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to bring you, the audience, in. So as you have questions, feel free to submit them into the Q&A. I want to start with Marichka and have her tell us a little bit more about the media marathon. I think our audience isn't as familiar with this. So tell us more about this. You've become one of the faces of this media marathon, the only television station during the war. How much of your content is news? How much is advice about the war? And how much is just plain encouragement? And what do Ukrainians really want from your show now? Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll start that we all started on February 24th as all different TV channels until we understood that we had to go to bomb shelters every time we heard air alert and we couldn't be live. So we were looking for some way out of that situation. Many of our colleagues, which are in many TV stations, are women, left the country. So we couldn't have enough staff to support 24 hours a day broadcast. So one of the decisions was to unite all TV channels in one big broadcast. So everyone would get 5, 4, sometimes 6 hour slot that they can provide for. That was the way to somehow to unite all our efforts in bringing the information to our audience 24 hours a day. And some of our people were taken what we call the secret location. Actually, it was a different place inside Ukraine, which we are not going to disclose until the war ends. Now we're all back to Kiev, but at that time it was very important to have a different location so that when there is an alert in Kiev and we can fill in those TV stations that could not work at that time. And actually, in first weeks in our location, we all every time we had a news anchor who was sleeping either or staying at the TV station, so we can fill in for our colleagues from different channels when they cannot work for some reason. I think it was crucial in the first weeks of the invasion so that the TV stations were still working. And I think it was on the third day of the invasion when we saw that our TV tower was attacked in Kiev, but we still were able to keep up broadcasting and TV stations, and the broadcast was resumed, I think, within a few hours the same evening. As for the content, I think the first day, I was actually with my colleague from the morning show, well, the first in Ukraine to go on live, because I'm used to be a morning shift news anchor, so I was at work, I think, at 5 a.m. already, and normally we go live at 7 a.m. That morning we were live at 6 a.m. and the first 2 hours we didn't have, I think, first 2 hours we didn't have any information from the government at all. So the only information we got was from our viewers through Instagram and through social media. So what we could do at that point in time, only to reassure our audience that we are here, we're with you, we can talk to you. And of course, as the time moved on, we needed to give people more information because people already put up with the situation that they were living in, and they needed more qualified information. And we're bringing more war experts, psychologists, and not many political experts. I think we still try to bring less politics into the marathon and more information concerning war. Of course, we have some restrictions, and more of them concerning, I think, just restrictions we get from people who are in the front line, not to show the location, not to show the objects that are being targeted by the missiles, so we don't disclose information for our enemies. And that's basically the main restrictions that we get as a I'm as a news anchor and we are as a broadcast company.
Thanks so much. That was really helpful. What's been the most surprising part about covering the war or being a face of Ukraine during the war?
I think the most challenging was that the first time that I personally was covering war taking place, such a full-scale war taking place in my country. That's the first challenge. The second challenge, being away from my kids who were taken by my parents to the western part in Ukraine. And of course, being worried about my husband who joined the army the first day of the invasion.
Great,
So
thank you.
That was the biggest challenge.
And the media marathon continues, right, Marichka? It's still 6 hours.
The news that we're having from our let's say managers that it will continue at least until the end of the year.
Okay, got it. Great, thank you so much. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that you and your ministry determine who appears on the media marathon that we've just been talking about. How do you decide who goes on now? How does that process work?
First of all, I would like to say that it's not the only one media which is on air right now. There are a lot of different channels who continue broadcasting in this or another way, but probably Marathon became the main source of information, especially in the first months of the war. It was a spontaneous decision of heads of different channels. They called me. And as soon as we had previously one example how we unite our efforts for specific one program before the war, they said that probably it's a good idea to start broadcasting each 6 hours different newsrooms. So in fact, newsrooms exist under the control of the heads of the channel, and they exchange in each 6 hours news coverage of what's going on in Ukraine during the war and around Ukraine. At the beginning, we do not have data right now. I mean, there is no Nielsen research, but we do have data from online media and from users of OTT platforms. At the beginning, it was around 35% market share of Marathon. Now it's around average 20% of market share, but we need to consider that this is not accurate information, what we can say. Apart from this, we did 2 or 3 opinion polls about recognition, about the level of recognition of Marathon. It is around 90-95%. So majority of population in Ukraine knows about Marathon, and around 60% trust to this news. So it's quite high figures. And despite we understand that it is a fatigue about the war, even in Ukraine, people want to somehow relax, not watching news coming from our front line, but verified information which provides Marathon. I think it's essential during the war. And the way how it was organized is also a sort of uniqueness. So we didn't provide any censorship as it should happen according to the law about situation, about martial law, I mean, during the war. So instead, we're trying to coordinate the major events. Like, for example, 2 days ago, it happened the second summit of First Ladies. So it was a special occasion which organized our colleagues, and we broadcasted it in Marathon.
Alexander, are most people watching the marathon on their phones, or are they watching it on their televisions, or is it sort of split?
The figures which I gave to you comes from both OTT platforms and on air, I mean free to air television. We do not have data about telephones, but we also need to realize that Marathon is also a source of quoting in different media, online, Telegram channels, and so on. So a lot of information which are coming from Marathon have bigger coverage in general, I mean, as news.
Got it. I take your point that people don't want just heavy news all the time, and they want some entertainment. We saw that there's been musical competitions. The First Lady was on there, but let's talk a little bit about the heavier news. So I've talked to some critics who say that the media marathon prevents opposition parties from being on your show. For example, Poroshenko and Razumkov aren't allowed on the show. Is this true?
Not at all. You can find, according to data, which I believe Detector Media is announcing, I mean, they're watching as watchdog organization. All news during marathon, probably the only one who watch all news during 24 hours. And there is, of course, appearances of different leaders of the parties. But as Marichka said, we're trying to give news, first of all, from frontline about situation around Ukraine, from officials and political parties during this period of time, not in the focus of news items. So if they produce some news which are interesting for the audience, not only for Marathon, but for all other, including online media, yes, they are quoting by Marathon. During the days of parliamentary sessions, there is a special bulletin around 15-20 minutes where deputies from different fractions have a word about what's were going on in Rada. So I think the presence of different figures from different political parties are there.
So all opposition heads of political parties are allowed to speak on Media Marathon?
Yes, but we need to understand that Marathon, in the way how we organize it, is in fact breaking news. So there is no political programs as it was before the war.
Gotcha.
Where talk shows,
Sure.
people from different parties were sitting and blah, blah, blah during 2 or 3 hours. So that's why it's not the format of Marathon.
Got it.
If there is a news which was for the public, yes, of course, they're included.
Got it. Got it. So Marichka talked about this a little bit before, but when will we go back to normal TV in Ukraine? She said that the Media Marathon will continue until Christmas. What are your plans? What can you tell us?
If until Christmas, we with Marichka and other Ukrainians together with you will celebrate victory, yes.
Okay, so no plans. You don't want to say more about your plans for 2023?
No, I think that it's important during the war, because situation is changing all the time, to keep going this effort about Marathon, because it not only allows us to feel the shoulder of each other, but also to share different expertise, news, what can be changed in Marathon, including not only shows like Summit of the First Ladies, but also probably some concerts or documentaries we recently introduced in Marathon. So it's a live organism and it's changing during the war.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that there'll be some questions for you in just a minute. Michael, can you help frame this and zoom out a little bit? Independent media in Ukraine was on shaky ground before the war. How has the war changed the complicated media landscape in Ukraine?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And I suspect some of the other panelists have more to say on this than I do. But looking at it from an outsider who spent much of the war in Ukraine, yeah, leading up to the war, the media landscape here was predominantly oligarch owned, especially the main TV channels. And like they act in real life, they also direct their TV stations to a great extent to present their self-serving interests. So I say that, but on the other hand, I also salute the quality of journalism here in Ukraine. Well before the war, Ukrainian journalists have proven themselves as professional, as hardworking, and passionate. So the hope of myself, of many others, is that as part of kind of the reconstruction, rehabilitation of Ukraine, is that the chips will fall in such a way that media outlets won't be reliant on the funds of the oligarchs. I have to say, though, that the war has been, of course, very, very damaging to the economy. The advertising market, I've been told by TV managers, has basically collapsed. So even before the war, that was a problem as well. So it's going to be very difficult. But
allow me to add, collapsed 90% on television.
It's absolutely huge. Thank you, Minister. Yeah. So the reason I point this out is that donors are going to have to take this into consideration, because we have to also zoom out and think, why is media important from the business perspective? Businesses rely on free flow and accurate information in whatever country of the world they work in or invest in. So that's going to be really, really important. The other thing is, I mean, the telemarathon, I've been paying close attention to it. And I have to say, people like Marichka and others, I've watched them and have operated under very, very difficult circumstances, long hours, covering very difficult stories, having to deal with family issues as well, all at the same time. So I really salute them. Now, it is good to see that I think independent and investigative journalism is having a revival right now, 150 plus days into the war. I see, for example, the Kyiv Independent has done quite a good piece on the president's proposed selection for the prosecutor general, and also Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's KEMA program looks like it's roared back into full force, shining light onto the dark corners of government and the private sector. And then a couple of other points, if I can, Melinda. The one thing, sadly, that this war has reminded us of is how dangerous the craft of journalism is. Almost more Ukrainian and foreign journalists have died in this war almost than in any other. And we're almost certain that there's been deliberate targeting from the Russian side. Another piece of news that we're seeing in terms of what the media landscape is going to look like afterwards is, during the war, we saw unprecedented interest from foreign media in the war in Ukraine. And we're now hearing that both the New York Times and the Washington Post are establishing permanent bureaus in Kyiv. CNN used to have two pop-up bureaus, one in Lviv, one in Kyiv, and now it just has the one in Kyiv. But I suspect there'll be talk of making that into a more permanent presence. Got to say, however, that the movement of New York Times and Washington Post towards Ukraine is probably also fueled by the fact that it's become almost impossible to practice independent journalism in Russia because of the crackdown. For example, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation was recently booted out of there. One last point, and I think this is really, really important. Social media, I think the minister referred to this, has played a huge role in this war in terms of allowing people to get information. Telegram especially, wherever I went in the first weeks of the war, you see people scrolling, looking for news there. And also TikTok has served as a platform, a very interesting platform, especially for young people to air grievances, to laugh, to cry, and that sort of thing. And that's really, really, really important during these times. In fact, for CNN Opinion, we're doing, this isn't self-promotion, we're doing a op-ed right now about how TikTok as a platform has served Ukrainians during the war. Finally, on this point, Melinda, another reason to the media is going to be so important, and also people need to be very vigilant, is I'm beginning to see the emergence of what I call sleeper accounts on social media. These are accounts, for example, on TikTok or elsewhere that have started in the war, people being very pro-Ukrainian. And then guess what? About a week ago or so, they started becoming more kind of pro-Russian, for example, urging an end to the war. So people have to be vigilant about things. But these are kind of ways the Russians roll, and we have to be very careful and keep an eye on that too.
Michael, let me ask you a follow-up question. So, it's great that we've seen this flowering of new media with TikTok and Telegram, but I'm being told that Ukrainians are increasingly going online and watching YouTube stations and cable television. The minister said that the market share has fallen for this media marathon, but isn't there a danger in more people using unverified media sources in a period of war?
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't that strike you as a
yeah,
big
sure.
danger?
Yeah, and it's a big challenge for the government, of course. Even though there's legitimate regulations that the government imposed early on for media outlets and individuals not to show strikes, live stream them, but people are doing that on Telegram, especially, anyways, and it's not doing Ukraine any favor. But yeah, look, I've written a lot about the Silicon Valley social media giants, and I'm pretty disgusted at how little they've done to boot off fake accounts or accounts which insult people or insult countries. Of course, we need freedom of expression, but during the war, a lot of these propagandistic channels that are clearly linked to the Russian government are still there on YouTube. They're still getting through. Of course, it's a lot harder, for example, like entities like Russia Today, but that's still a big problem. One thing related to this, it is an information war after all, and I know it's a bit of a sensitive topic, Melinda, but at a time when Ukraine is facing all this and is facing a very aggressive enemy, it looks like the budgets for a very important part of the front line, the Ukrainian embassies abroad, are being cut, from Canberra to the UN Permanent Representation Mission in New York City. I think maybe the minister can talk about this, but I think it's totally the wrong time to be cutting budgets. If anything, they need to be increased, because the message needs to get out about what's going on here and what the Russians are doing.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. Olga, you started a publication months, remind me how many months or weeks before February 24th. How is the Kyiv Independent doing financially, and how's your staff doing?
Yes, thank you, Melinda. We started in November, actually. And of course, when we were starting, we started Kyiv Independent because the Kyiv Post, which we were working for, fell apart. And to be honest, even though there were already warnings in foreign media, especially about the incoming invasion, it was the least of our concerns. We were all focused on fundraising and making the publication survive financially, which is why we arrived at February being really, really geared up and focused on fundraising, especially among the Western audience, which meant then when the invasion happened and the Western audience suddenly became so interested in Ukraine and so generous with Ukraine, we already were in place to really do well with fundraising. And we did. The fundraising campaign, which we already had running when the invasion started in February, did really well and got us over £1 million in donations. What is more important for us is we currently have over 6,000 people who pledge monthly donations to us. They are small donations, but these are the people who we are trying to retain, because these are the supporters that want to, they're really invested in the idea. But we of course feel that the interest is falling, even though we understand that we secured our financial future in the nearest perspective. We understand that the interest for Ukraine is falling, and we see it very, very literally, not just with website numbers, but with the number of people who are our patrons dropping, and we are now focused on retaining that. And it's kind of, it's in line with what Oksana Tkachenko mentioned, with war fatigue in the world. So we are trying to fight that in terms of both the content side, finding how to write about Ukraine in the way that people keep reading about it, and also from the the survival side, how to keep the audience interested so they keep supporting us.
Olga, what advice would you give to donors thinking about ways to support Ukraine now and in the future in terms of keeping independent media alive? what recommendations would you have? And be specific. You know, things like donors tend to give in 3-year blocks. Is that long enough?
Well, so thank you for asking that, because I just mentioned that we are doing well financially, but we are a huge exception in the Ukrainian market. Ukrainian media need urgent support, and everybody keeps talking about it. We're using our platforms to talk about that too, and to support fundraising campaigns of other Ukrainian media. And speaking of donors, I think the first advice is to, of course, move much faster than they used to moving. And develop, if they haven't already, develop emergency funding programs to keep media afloat now, because Ukrainian media now, they don't have several months to wait for funding to be approved. And from this comes the second advice, which is to try to really switch to institutional support more, because now is not the time when Ukrainian media can afford to chase program support and to try to put together the puzzle of funding where they get like this project there and this project there. It's really not tangible now. So switching to institutional support is important.
Super, thank you. And I know this is an
may
obvious.
I add something, because
Please,
it's quite
go ahead,
important
Alexander.
from what Olga said.
Yeah, please go ahead.
90% drop in ad in media, it's in television, and around 70 to 80% on online media. So and this is in the time when Russia financing their state-owned media and so-called state-owned media heavily. They increased budgeting for those media during the war. And if you look to the schedule of main propagandistic channels in Russia, it looks like material about Russophobia, material about Kvartal 95, material about Leonid Kravchuk. So all agenda, it's about the war. And instead of, and in the situation when state do not have resources, there are some resources, probably we can support some projects like Freedom. It's a Russian-speaking channel for mainly audience located around the world and in Russia. But for other purposes, I think it's important to call what I discussed with my colleagues, ministers in Europe and in America, information Rammstein. If we do have a sort of support with weapons, we need to coordinate efforts of civilized world, how to fight Russian propaganda from one side, and which is essentially important, how to find resources for independent media, for other medias, because they are really under the threat of closing down. There are cuts for people who are working in media of their jobs, and really the resources to continue fighting on information front are very small for very short period of time from now.
That's a great point. I love that idea, and I think you're right that the sums need to be large. And Olga's point that it needs to be institutional support and not just project support is really important. And I hope we can get that message out. And I hope, Mr. Minister, we can amplify your idea. If you'd like to write an article calling for that informational Rammstein, we'd love to publish that. So you have an open offer. Great. Okay, let's do it. Sounds great. Olga, anything else you want to tell us about how things are going at the Kyiv Independent? I know that Michael mentioned this, but this is a hard time to be a journalist. And there have been a number of journalists who've been killed, and people feel that. How does your staff cope? How are you guys feeling? Anything else from Kyiv Independent that we should know?
Thank you, Melinda. Well, the short answer to that is that it turns out that the war brings out the strengths that you didn't even know people have who are working with every day. You discover them from a whole new side, and it's been absolutely amazing. And we have a very young team. It's 25 people, and I'm 33 years old. I'm one of the oldest people on the team. So I'm just amazed every day, and not just at our stuff. Everyone I know in Ukrainian journalism, when the Pulitzer Prize came for Ukrainian Pulitzer citation, special citation, right, came for Ukrainian journalists, it felt like something that is so overdue, because the world doesn't know it, but Ukrainian journalists are quite amazing, and they have been doing amazing work for years until now. And I'm just really proud to be, to have our team as one of the best known like representations of that in the world, but I just want the world to remember that we are just we are more visible for them compared to our other Ukrainian colleagues. But there are hundreds of wonderful teams and journalists in Ukraine right now who need the world's support.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's a great point to end on. Okay, Sevgil, we saved the best for last. Sevgil Musayeva is the editor of Ukrainska Pravda, which is one of the leading online news websites. Sevgil, has the war changed your coverage at all?
Okay, thank you, Melinda. First of all, I will apologize for my terrible cold. I hope it will not annoy you. So, of course, it has changed dramatically because, Ukrainska Pravda focus more on political agenda, on anti-corruption issues. And for us, war started earlier this year. When Western media started to explain all the details, and we provided all the details from Western media, from different think tanks about large-scale war and about invasion, and people didn't want to believe on it. And we were trying to find some good points. We were trying to interview people from cities that not far from occupied territories. For example, we went to Berdyansk, we went to Novakakhovka, and even today, for example, we published an interview with mayor of Novakakhovka, which is now under occupation. And it is so strange because we interviewed this man earlier this year, and he said that he didn't believe, and all people trusted him that invasion will not happen. So at the same time, we were thinking about our security plan and our own security plan for our team, and it helped us for the first days of war, because first days of war were very important for Ukrainian people and for understanding and for Ukrainian media landscape. And I know that it was a big problem for all Ukrainian media that some of the journalists were in Kiev and some were on the way for more safest places. And that's why they were not able to work. At that time, already one part of our team were already in western part of the country, and they were working like 24 hours. So we now focus more on war crimes. We focus on front lines. We focused more in analytics. Even when I do remember when it happened first time in April, when we published first our article about political agenda, people were not happy about that. So they started to blame us. Why you're interested in politics? It's not time. It's not a good time. So journalists face with a lot of challenges. Self-censorship is one of the most important, I think now, and not to harm the second one, and you have to think every single time when you publish something how it will be, and at the same time focus more on important issues. I mean, war coverage, frontline. So we have our reporters in different parts of our country now, so they cover, for example, today our reporter went to Siversk, and she was so upset today morning during our editorial meeting that she said that she didn't expect what she saw in this particular place.
Sevgil, I'm glad you brought up self-censorship. So are there certain topics like corruption that you don't touch anymore because you don't want to hurt Ukraine's image? Is that a topic that you guys are avoiding for now?
No, we followed this topic. We didn't publish any anti-corruption investigation because it became more difficult now even to work with all this stuff, but we will do. I will not inform now, but we have done some plans. But we more focus now on Russian oligarchs, first of all. And I want to mention, for example, in the beginning of March, when we found all yachts of Russian oligarchs, and then we published that in our website, and Western partners asked us to provide all geolocations and details, and they put sanctions on these yachts. These yachts were arrested after our publication. So, and a lot of such things. So we're more focused now Russian oligarchs and discovering some important details about how Russia, for example, does everything possible just to avoid sanctions, how Russian oligarchs avoid sanctions, etc.
So Gil, I'm interested in how Ukrainian journalists, and Marichka and Olga may have examples too, Ukrainian journalists helped Western journalists, especially at the beginning. I think one of the best examples, you may have specific examples. One of the examples I heard was that Radio Svoboda had used geolocation information and pinpointed all of the mass graves in Mariupol. And New York Times and Washington Post were able to use that data. What have you found? Are you guys working a lot with international media?
Yeah, so like every single week, 2 or 3. At the beginning, it was like mass, because I'm also was a fellow at Harvard, a Nieman fellow, then in Oxford. So I have colleagues around the world, and all of them were starting to ask me and to provide all the details, organize an interview with Zelensky or Yermak, etc. So I was a kind of a press officer of Ukraine. I was thinking that in the beginning of war, it was one important part of our work as well. So even today, 2 or 3 journalists every single week ask me about some contacts, some information, just even to verify some information. So it's about cooperation, and I know that a lot of people read Ukrainska Pravda and consume news from Ukrainska Pravda as well. I want to mention, even the first day we received around 7 million views in our website, and we were second website in our country after the Google. So you can imagine.
Did you last time we spoke, you were talking about moving to English as well. Have you developed an English language platform?
Yes. We have English version, and we founded our English version website for the first 2 or 3 days after beginning of invasion. So
that 7 million figure is Ukrainian and English?
Every single month, we receive around 5 million unique users from abroad. I mean, for English version.
Wow. Okay, great. Olga, what are your numbers, if you don't mind sharing?
They're close to that, actually. No, I mean, I follow, of course, all the English language versions of other Ukrainian websites. Ukrainska Pravda is probably doing one of the best ones. So really kudos on that. Speaking of your earlier question about cooperation, I just wanted to mention that while we don't really have any content cooperation, except that journalists just tell me all the time about how they use our news as the primary source. But we did find very useful, and we are finding it still very useful, the cooperation that we are offered in terms of just some guidance and mentorship from some international media. Just a recent example, just this Friday, we had an amazing online workshop with The Guardian on retaining members, which we implemented something from that workshop, and we got 100 new members in the next 2 days. So they've been very helpful in terms of just just helping Ukrainian media in crisis. And they even if there are not so many options for cooperating in terms of content creation, they still find ways to offer help on other side, and it's very appreciated.
Yeah, that's a great point. But I love the point, though, that independent or that international media were relying on Ukrainian media for specific examples and for verification of data. It really speaks to the professionalism and the trust and how good you guys are. And that's a great story. Marichka, what about on the broadcast level?
Yeah, I would like to add that the first thing we did as a TV channel, normally we would sell our footage or trade our footage. But since the war started, we just we decided to share all our footage that we had for free for whoever wants to use it in the news program. So many countries just took our videos, our footage for free, and used them in their TV programs. And I personally was speaking, to many TV channels the first months, from Australia to Norway and Ireland, United States, Great Britain. I was even on women's talk shows because they wanted to know how Ukrainian, not only journalists, but women with children deal with this. So I think that many people in our newsroom who speak different languages, Italian also were just very often live guests in Italian studios as well. So, I mean, many, I think, including Olga and Sevilla, who speak different languages, were, I think, welcome guests in many news programs all over the world the first months.
Absolutely. Sevgil, how are your advertising revenues? Have you seen a major decline, or are you guys doing okay?
No, now it's much better than it was in March, because in March it was around 20% from our budget. So what we have, so we were trying to fundraise as well, and also thanks for Genomics. They helped. They covered. They started the fundraising campaign in GoFundMe, and it helped actually for a lot of independent media. So Team Media still work on that fundraising campaign. And also we were trying to find money from different donors for the first months. Now which it is much better. So advertising not in a full scale, but back, and we're happy about that.
Super, super. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, my friends, we have 16 minutes and many questions. If you are in the audience and would like to ask one of these wonderful people a question, go ahead and drop it into the Q&A and I will be glad to read it. Mr. Minister, Sergey would like you to repeat the news marathon numbers. Could you tell us again the viewership and trust figures? And I think you're muted, Alexander.
90 to 95%, it's people knows about Marathon, about its existence, so they recognize it. And around 60% of the trust.
Super. And you said that the market share was 35% at the beginning and is about 20% now?
And now around 20, but this is not data which we used usually. This is data coming from different sources. So we can't rely definitely on it, but at least it shows trend.
It's good to have a number. Great. Thank you so much. A question from Adrian. What will be the impact of the closure of Augmented's channels? Mr. Minister, would you go first? And then I know Michael wanted to say something about that, and any of the other ladies. Go ahead, Mr. Minister.
It can have not necessarily right now, but in future, big impact, because this group probably was the biggest one and the wealthiest one, was financed by richest men in this country, with a lot of employees, with a lot of stuff they produce, not only in news, but also in entertainment, series, programs, etc. So the first impact will be that, unfortunately, a lot of these people can lost their jobs.
Yep.
We'll be trying to find and to help them to assist to find in other ways. And secondly, about the impact after the war. Definitely, with withdrawal of Augmented Group, the landscape will be not anymore the same. It was overcrowded market. We don't need, in normal circumstances, for normal markets, so big number of channels. That's from one side, but from another side, the quality of Ukrainian channels were very high. You can compare it with the leading European nations, and definitely far ahead of many Central European countries. So, and the quality, it will have effect on the quality of the programs. And in general, let's see how this landscape and market can look like after the war. Definitely it will change. It will be changed.
Alexander, thank you. That's a really thoughtful answer. How many people were employed by that media group, approximately?
I don't want to be quoted, but as far as I remember, around 4,000 or something like that.
So pretty significant.
Before the war.
Before the war. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Michael, any comments on Augmented's channel?
Yeah. Well, according to SCM and Augmented's statement, they had 10 terrestrial and satellite TV channels, online resources, print media. Augmented says he invested 1.5 billion. And yeah, Minister, you're right. They claim to have employed about 4,000 journalists. The other thing, by the way, Ukraine 24, if you go to the United States and you turn on a lot of cable systems, you will have seen Ukraine 24 on there giving out Ukrainian news, and that disappearance of that channel will be a loss in that regard. Melinda, very, very quick comment about journalists and money. The other thing we have to remember is a lot of journalists were displaced by the war. A lot of them, according to the Ukrainian World Congress, are in Europe. They're not even working the profession anymore. So I recently came back from Portugal. There were talks there about creating possibly a media hub that could employ them. So watch this space. And very quickly on institutional money, what Olga said is, if you look at PBS, the NewsHour, scrolling at the beginning of the end, there's a lot of foundations and companies funding that. A lot of them are the same ones who said, we want to help Ukraine. They should put their money where their mouth is and come here. And then also there's a lot of money in Silicon Valley, probably fed by egos of the rich guys there that want to put money in media. So Olga, maybe we need to go to Silicon Valley and talk to those guys and get them to direct their
Can I add something to that?
Please go ahead.
I don't want to put everyone down, but from my experience talking to people in the West, including the tech giants people, two disappointing things. One, you mentioned earlier, Michael, that how you're disgusted by how they have been unable to take down Russian propaganda. That, but also complete denial when it comes to, when you raise the issue of how you're gonna try to amplify verified independent media's voices on your platforms. The answer to that I got from Facebook, talking to one of their top people, was, we can do an online training for you so you learn about algorithms, which is not helpful, as you can guess. And the second disappointing thing is that all these people are really, really interested in Russia more than Ukraine, in the so-called, good Russians, the independent Russian media who got out of Russia. So a lot of money is going to come, and a lot of attention is going to come that way. And it's really something that's that unfortunately is going to go in the way of funding.
I was speaking with one ministers from Europe, and they said that they're going to help Ukrainian media. I asked how much and for whom, and they responded, Telekanal Dost.
Oh my God, I had the same thing happen. I was put in a discussion in London, and I was told that another Ukrainian journalist is going to be on the round table. And I asked whom, and I was told Telekanal Dost. How the same thing happened. So maybe they are misrepresenting themselves when they're trying to,
Olga, explain what that means to people who don't know.
So Dorsio TV Rain is the best known independent TV channel in Russia that they shut down in Russia, and they have just reopened in Latvia. But they are not Ukrainian and never were, and
so we have some education to do. That's the point. We have some major education to do in the donor community. Sevgil, question for you. This is one from our friends in London, from Anna Morgan. Is there any data from the recently occupied territories? Do people have access to Ukrainian media?
Okay, thank you. Very important questions. Yes, how we gather information, how we receive information from occupied territories. In each occupied city, we have our civil journalists and people we know before the war, and they helped us to gather this information. They texted us, they provide us all the details. Unfortunately, even this Sunday in the Zaporizhzhia region, which is now occupied by Russian forces, Russians shut down even Google, Facebook, so it became more slowly. But people use VPN, people use Telegram channels, so. Yes, we have some problems in the occupied territories with providing news, with information, and even with internet, because, for example, sometimes even when 2 weeks ago, not even 2 weeks ago, around 10 days ago, when Nova Kakhovka was under attack, I asked about one of our civil journalists, how are you? And he just responded me like 2 or 3 days ago that he was out of internet, he was out of news, and he didn't know what even, I didn't know what actually is he alive or what happened with him. So, but yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to add on getting free information in occupied territories?
Melinda, I can add about
Please.
Akhmetov's pulling out of
Please, go
TV
ahead.
business, how it affects us. You know that many, as you mentioned, many journalists lost their job because they were displaced, but many journalists lost their work because they were reduced. Even in news journalists, not to mention people who were in entertainment programs, because their contracts were suspended, which means they can possibly be back to their job after the war ends. But you know, now having approximately 4,000 people who have no job in our very competitive and narrow business as TV stations means that there will be more pressure on journalists who stayed, because there are so many people who are jobless now. So potentially it can be a challenge for some pressure on journalism who stayed, because our salaries also have been cut off by significant percent. And of course, we wouldn't complain now because we have people who have no income at all. So potentially having this people who now are jobless puts pressure on people who stay.
Gotcha. Marichka, well, stay unmuted for a minute. You get the hard question. So everyone wants to know how to fight war fatigue. And you are a brilliant broadcast storyteller. So how do you answer that question? We see declining interest in Ukraine everywhere. And I know you said that people see it in Ukraine itself, and people want to get away from the grisly stories of war. How do we fight this and keep people engaged and committed?
Oh, I don't have a recipe, but I recently talked to an international journalist who was actually a Eurovision fan, and he said that I'm, as a British, can say when I watch the British news and hear information from TV anchors, I do feel sympathy for Ukraine and understand what is going on, but I get much more information when I see real people, your Eurovision singers, when they come, let's say, to London, and they tell their story in the first person. So after having heard that, for me, it's I think that the more we bring just real people into our news broadcast, not just officials, not just people who are responsible for what is going on in the front line, but people who are really there, their families. Now we're going to have tomorrow just a family that had a very viral video of they reuniting for a few days when their men came from the front line. So we want to bring more ordinary people into our broadcast, because somehow people get tired from having and listening to the same speakers all over again for a few months already. So people get tired. We get tired as news anchors interviewing the same people for so many times. So I think that bringing more new faces into our broadcast is a recipe. And I mean, it's still impossible to keep people, engaged into the news 24 hours a day. The best recommendation that the psychologists are given to read the news or listen to the news just 2 times a day. So unfortunately, it's the situation that we live in. So besides doing my work as a news anchor, I also do my work as an Instagram influencer. I try to put all the main news of the day in the end of the day. So people, younger women who are busy with their kids or who live abroad and cannot follow our news, at least get this short report in Instagram, because it's a very special audience that also needs to be informed.
That's smart. I would add one thing.
Melinda, may I add something to Marichka?
Of course you can. Go ahead.
I think she's right. We're trying to bring another agenda, especially for Europeans. We organized during the war more than 500 different culture events. I mean, concerts, exhibitions, and so on. This week are going to start a joint tour with Metropolitan Opera of Ukrainian artists. The week later, the month later, it will be Ukrainian United Ballet from Netherlands. So that's another form. And in terms of occupied territories, 2 sources, VPN and satellite.
Super, thank you. Alexander, stay unmuted, please. There's a couple more questions for you. One person wants to know, will the government take a more prominent role in shaping Ukraine's media landscape after the war ends?
Doesn't mean shaping.
Yeah, well, how active will the government be after the war ends in the content?
I think definitely Ukrainian independent media, especially audiovisual media, who needs more money, will need to have a state support or financing, producing series, documentaries, whatever. There will be a little ground for advertisers to continue on the same level, investing in Ukrainian media, at least for some period of time, more than 1 or 2 years. So that's why we're speaking about Rammstein. There is a real trouble in terms of supporting Ukrainian media. This is only one front, which we not focusing so much as it's needed really, not only to support financially, but also to fight together against Russian propaganda.
Wonderful. Alexander, another question for you. What steps have been taken by the Ukrainian government to help protect journalists on the front lines?
It's a tricky question because journalists want to be the first on the front line. And there are limits according to military demands about access to the front lines and broadcasting live during the war. So unfortunately, many journalists were killed, not only on front line, but mainly on occupied territories. And most of people who have accreditation of Minister of Defense, of course, have the defense system. I mean, casks and how you call it on the
the vest. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think we need to balance from one side the questions that journalists want to get more from the front line, and another one is the security, not only of them, but for our military operations too.
Wonderful. One more question for you, Mr. Minister. Why was the decision made to disconnect the signal from TV channels Espresso, Priami, and Channel 5?
It was done by our Security Council. I think it's an appropriate question for them.
Okay, super. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, Marichka, Sevgil, Olga, I want to give you guys, you have about 10 seconds. Go ahead, and this is the big question that everyone wants to know. What does the model for media in Ukraine look like after the war? Michael, you get the first swing. Are the oligarchs in or out?
Yeah, very quick. It'll be a mixed system, similar to what we see in other countries. I think there'll be government money there. There'll be private money like we have in Canada. The telecoms run some of our bigger channels, and of course, private money. But the best thing for Ukraine, I think, will be a very mixed system that will help employ all of these journalists who have been let go or have their salaries cut. Because again, very briefly, there's so much talent here. There's so much to report on. And we cannot let the Russian side gain the upper hand in the narrative on what's happening in Ukraine.
Super, excellent point. Marichka?
I think the most important question is how much longer the war is going to be happening, because the longer the war takes place, the less TV channels, I think, can survive this war, because I fear that Akhmetov's channel will not be the last one to pull out of TV business for a different reason, mainly for a financial reason. Because as I was talking to our financial director, he said that the news that he got from his Croatian colleague, that after the war in Croatia was over, it had been 8 months before they started running real commercial on TV and having some income. So I believe that after the war ends, that the TV business in Ukraine will be dramatically reshaped and partly supported by the government and partly financed by businesses.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sevgil? Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. So Ukraine is fighting for the right to exist, and Ukrainian media will do everything possible to help Ukrainian people survive during this war and it's a question of existence of our country. So we will do our best, even in very difficult, hard circumstances which we face already and will face in future. And I think it's not a question even for Ukrainian media, for each Ukrainian now, to do everything possible for the victory.
Thank you. Thanks, Sevgil. Olga, you get the last remark. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I think now is a very, very fragile moment for the freedom of speech in Ukraine. As they say, truth is the first casualty of war. And I really hope that when we, on the other end, after the victory, we still have strong independent media. And I'm really watching very carefully what the relationship between the government and the media is going to shape up to be, because what we see now, of course, is not a normal situation, and I don't know what it's going to look like when we go back into normal. And Sergei said very rightly that Ukraine is fighting for the right to exist. I also think that Ukraine is fighting for the right to define itself and to not be Russia, and that also means having free press, which is essential to how Ukraine wants to define itself. So for me, the main thing I'll be watching, after the war or after the victory, as we prefer to say, is the state of the freedom of speech in Ukraine.
Super. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really a pleasure. You brought us up to speed. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Marichka. Thank you, Sevgil. Thank you, Olga. Many people have expressed their sincere appreciation for the work you do, for your heroism. Please thank all of your staffs and your colleagues. We rely on you for our coverage in English. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for joining us. And please join us again at the Atlantic Council for more events on Ukraine. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.